We gather this morning with these words from the Reverend Wayne Arneson. We come together today seeking a reality beyond our narrow selves that binds us in compassion, love, and understanding to other human beings and to the interdependent web of all living things. May our hearts and minds be opened to the power and the insight that weave together the scattered threads of our experience and help us remember the wholeness of which we are a part.
So for today's Wonderbox, we're actually going to be staying in your seats instead of inviting the children or adults up, if you wish. So today we're going to be actually sharing a story that I think might really help us, children and adults alike, to expand a little bit of how we might see God in the world.
Once upon a time, which could have been 2,000 years ago, or maybe only 673 years ago, or maybe even yesterday, or maybe right now, God said, "I want to play with my friends."
And because God is God, soon as the words were spoken, God's friends were there. When God saw them all gathered, God said,
"Let's play something."
"Oh, good idea," said God's friends. "What shall we play?" God thought for a minute and then said,
"I know, let's play hide and seek."
The friends all said, "Yay! Yay!" They did it. For they knew that hide and seek with God was always exciting and different because God was the one who hid, and God always thought of wonderful places to hide.
So God's friends closed their eyes tight and they counted to 10. When they opened their eyes, God wasn't there anymore. So they all went off to look for God.
One friend decided to look close upon the earth and soon came to a meadow. As he was searching, he stopped to admire the tender new sprouts of green grass pushing their way up toward the sun. As he bent down over to look more closely at the tender green, he realized there was something special and amazing and wonderful about it. So he jumped up and ran back to home base, calling out,
"God is green and growing. I found God in the grass."
Another one of God's friends decided to look for God in the night. She watched the sun go down and the workaday noises stop and the lights in the houses go out. As it got darker and as the peaceful night wrapped itself around her, she listened very hard. And then she realized there was something special and amazing and wonderful about it. And when it was so still that she could see and hear nothing at all, she suddenly jumped up and ran to home base, calling out,
"I found God. God is peaceful and dark. I found God in the night."
A third friend looked upon the earth, and he felt the mystery on the grass growing toward the sun. He stayed and watched the night, and he felt the mystery of the darkness and the night. He thought to himself,
"These mysteries are special and amazing and wonderful. I found mysteries, but I'm not sure if I want to call them God."
A fourth friend decided to look for God where people were. He joined a group of people going home from work and went with them into the store where they bought food. He went with them back out on the street as they started for their homes. He was with them when someone came up and said, "Please, I am very hungry. Could you share a little food with me?" The people readily agreed, and as he watched, he realized there was something special and amazing and wonderful about those people, and he suddenly turned around and ran to home base, calling out,
"I found God. God is love and sharing.
I found God in people who care for others.
Finally, two more of God's friends, a boy and a girl, decided to look for God together. After a time, they came to a house and they decided to look for God in the house. And in the house, they saw a room and they looked for God in the room. And in the room, they saw a mirror and they looked for God in the mirror. And as they looked for God in the mirror, they realized there was something special and amazing and wonderful being reflected in it. And they suddenly turned around and ran to home base, calling out,
We found God. You found
At this, God appeared again and said,
I had so much fun. Weren't those good hiding places? Some of you found me, others weren't so sure, and others are still looking. That's okay, because the most important thing is just to play the game. Let's do it again, because I'm sure I can think of some other good hiding places.
And so they all called out, Ollie, Ollie, oxen, free, free, free. And the game started all over again. We hope this wonder-filled story has given you an opportunity, a desire to learn, play, and search for that which is true and meaningful for you. We'll now sing our children and youth off to their classes.
While some individuals are very certain about God, and when I say God here, I am using it as shorthand for the unknown mysteries of the universe, which we imagine to be bigger than us, but that's really a mouthful. So I'm just going to be saying God. Feel free to insert your preferred term. Anyway, while some individuals are very certain about God, the human race as a whole is quite uncertain when it comes to questions surrounding a spiritual force or forces beyond our physical world. Does God exist? If so, in what form? What are the characteristics of God? Is there more than one God? How much control does God have over the world? These are just a smattering of the questions that human beings have been asking about God for centuries and are still asking. Why do we keep asking? Well, at least in part, because the human brain really likes certainty. But I would like to suggest that there is value in embracing uncertainty. Uncertainty is often seen as a way station on the path to making a decision. But for me, when it comes to questions about God, uncertainty is the destination. I am uncertain about God's existence and description, and I do not think that I ever will be certain, and I am okay with that. I would be lying if I said that I would not prefer to be certain, as again, I think it is in human nature to prefer certainty. But that is the challenge. Living with the uncertainty, living into the uncertainty, being at peace with the uncertainty, taking a deep breath and being present with the uncertainty. I still pray to the great something out there that I hope exists. I still follow the religion of my forebears, which I hope is rooted in divinity, but I make no claims of certainty. And I find that my lack of certainty opens my mind up to all of the beautiful possibilities of what God may or may not be. Human beings throughout time have created a veritable cornucopia of metaphors about God, and we are free to create more. But as Rabbi Toba Spitzer writes, a metaphor is not a definition. Whatever that force vaster than ourselves might be, we can't define it, but we can try to articulate our experience of it. And that's where we need metaphors. Metaphors are not just definitions or descriptions of God. They are conduits which help us connect to that which is beyond our understanding. As Rabbi Spitzer continues, metaphors are explorations of what it means to be in relationship with that which creates and nurtures, challenges, and guides us. To give just two examples, God is not literally our father or our king, but humans understand human relationships. So describing God in those terms can help some of us connect to God. And that is the real goal here, connection. Connection with something that many of us sense is there, but can't quite put our fingers on. Connection with the mystery, the possibility of what might be out there beyond what we can experience with our five senses. Connection with something bigger than ourselves. How do the metaphors we use to make that connection help us? What do they say about us and our deepest desires? How can we get beyond the need to know for sure and be open to all of the possibilities? Our first reading is from a book titled Metaphorical Theology, Models of God in Religious Language by Dr. Sally McFague. To many people, metaphor is merely a poetic ornament for illustrating an idea or adding rhetorical color to abstract or flat language. It appears to have little to do with ordinary language until one realizes that most ordinary language is composed of dead metaphors, some obvious, such as the arm of the chair, and others less obvious, such as tradition, meaning to hand over or hand down. Most simply, a metaphor is seeing one thing as something else, pretending this is that because we do not know how to think or talk about this. So we use that as a way of saying something about it. Thinking metaphorically means spotting a thread of similarity between two dissimilar objects, events, or whatever, one of which is better known than the other, and using the better known one as a way of speaking about the lesser known. Poets use metaphor all the time because they are constantly speaking about the great unknowns: mortality, love, fear, joy, guilt, hope, and so on. Religious language is deeply metaphorical for the same reason, and it is therefore no surprise that Jesus's most characteristic form of teaching, the parables, should be extended metaphors. Less obvious, but of paramount importance, is the fact that metaphorical thinking constitutes the basis of human thought and language. From the time we are infants, we construct our world through metaphor. That is, just as young children learn the meaning of the color red by finding the thread of similarity through many dissimilar objects, red ball, red apple, red cheeks, so we constantly ask when we do not know how to think about something, what is it like? Far from being an esoteric or ornamental rhetorical device superimposed on ordinary language, metaphor is ordinary language. It is the way we think.
Our second reading is a poem titled God by Khalil Gibran. In the ancient days, when the first quiver of speech came to my lips, I ascended the holy mountain and spoke unto God, saying, Master, I am thy slave. Thy hidden will is my law, and I shall obey thee forevermore. But God made no answer, and like a mighty tempest, passed away. And after 1,000 years, I ascended the holy mountain and again spoke unto God, saying, Creator, I am thy creation. Out of clay hast thou fashioned me, and thee I owe mine all. And God made no answer, but like 1,000 swift wings passed away. And after 1,000 years, I climbed the holy mountain and spoke unto God again, saying, Father, I am thy son. In pity and love thou hast given me birth, and through love and worship I shall inherit thy kingdom. And God made no answer. And like the mist that veils the distant hills, he passed away. And after 1,000 years, I climbed the sacred mountain and again spoke unto God, saying, My God, my aim and my fulfillment, I am thy yesterday, and thou art my tomorrow. I am thy root in the earth, and thou art my flower in the sky, and together we grow before the face of the sun. Then God leaned over me, and in my ears whispered words of sweetness, and even as the sea that enfoldeth a brook that runneth down to her, he enfolded me. And when I descended to the valleys and the plains, God was there also. If we are to become bridge builders, which I believe is inherent in our history and assured by our vision as a congregation, we must focus on two essential and inextricable things in the present. One of these is knowledge, and the second are tools. And as I said, these are inextricable components of becoming bridge builders. Over the next several weeks, we will dive more deeply into the whats and hows and whys of cultivating interfaith community. And I would be remiss if I didn't preface this and all of the following services, really any service I ever do, that you will not walk away with all the knowledge and all the tools. You will not leave here fully awakened or confident in the work of bridge building across religious and cultural differences. However, what I hope you do leave with is a hunger, a curiosity, and a longing for more knowledge, for more tools, and most importantly, for more experiences building and gathering on the bridges that we surely need in the world in which we live today. The first 3 Sundays of this series will focus on knowledge, and more specifically, there are about 3 core components of all religions, spiritualities, and philosophies throughout history. These are the topics of God, ethics, and spirituality/death. God, ethics, and, not spirituality, suffering. That one's better. Suffering or death. Okay, so a pretty light few weeks we have before us. Let's leave ethics and death and perhaps our taxes for another day. I still need to do mine. Today we are exploring the concept of God. And for many of us, the topic of God, let alone the study of it in such as in fields of theology or cosmology, is not a regular affair. Many Unitarian Universalists have a more humanistic worldview, centering human experience as that which has the potential to act, be observed, and be refined. We Unitarian Universalists have for some time let go of a notion that our salvation is gained through the atonement of a sacrificial God or by the narrow love of an angry God. Instead, we have focused more on character and on the ways we can improve our characters and thus our actions to better ourselves, families, communities, and the world. God, well, for many of us is a big old question mark or maybe an ellipsis. And I have some theories about why this is. The first is one that I'm sure many of you might agree with, which is that for many of you, your early lives were shaped by harmful and even abusive conceptions of God. Perhaps the God of your childhood was angry, judgmental, homophobic, and punitive. Perhaps the God of your childhood was male, white, old, a fatherly figure of sorts. Perhaps the God of your childhood was at once aloof and ever watching, all powerful and yet seemingly on the sidelines when it mattered most. These, among other possible descriptions, would lead me, or perhaps any of us to the question, why would I want to believe, let alone worship, such a God? And so many of you have moved away from that God, from a particular understanding of God, and likely with that, a separation came. With that separation came a departure from a previous religious or spiritual community. Of course, many of you may have grown up outside of a religious community, raised secularly or in a different religious tradition, or as a family that didn't go to X, Y, or Z place on X, Y, or Z day of the week. Unitarian Universalism and UUCCI may therefore feel like a refuge from God, a literal sanctuary and shelter from the violence and storms of the world. Here you may, I hope, experience the goodness of human connection, the power of shared values applied to shared work, and the possibility of nurturing a future which perhaps only exists in our dreams. With all there is to do at UUCCI, you may conclude that, well, there isn't much time for God. We got love to celebrate. We got justice to create and a future to behold. In this sense, we might say the first theory of why God is of lesser importance, generally speaking, is that we have come to be concerned about the baby in the bathtub rather than the dirtied water in which it swims. Okay, when I wrote that last sentence, it made more sense in my head. And so this idiom, the rest of the service uses this idiom, and you're going to have to go with me on this. I do believe the point remains. By being here at UCCI, you have chosen to not throw out the baby with the bathwater, but rather you have kept the baby and removed the bathwater. The baby in this case is community, hope, courage, love, and vision for a better world. It's not that you cannot achieve those things beyond a community such as this one. Rather, UCCI is one of many places that can facilitate and support those commitments being centered and remaining centered in your life. The question I have is, what happened to all that bathwater? So what if it's dirty? Is there more water on tap? Are we ever going to take a bath again? Do we even need to bathe? Is a shower an easier method for having the baby and good hygiene to boot? Well, here's the thing. As much as I enjoy, value, and affirm the bohemian, hippie, au naturel lifestyle, I also acknowledge that nearly every species in the animal kingdom engages in some sort of personal cleansing routine. And to run the metaphor into the ground, I would then turn to my second theory of our generalized feeling regarding God as you use. While we have rightly so drained the bathtub, many of us are unclear of what comes next. For some of us, we might think of this scenario similarly to the 1970 chart topper War, popularized by Edwin Starr. You know, the countercultural, soulful, anti-Vietnam protest song, repeating the question, what is it good for? Absolutely nothing. Well, whether war or God, there is more nuance to this situation. One reason I think we tend to get to stick with the baby over the bathwater is that we cannot imagine a scenario where the baby and the bathwater can coexist. Remember that whole running the idiom into the ground? We're still going there. But hear me out. If the dominant narrative and description of God in the West is similar to the qualities I laid out earlier, well, then perhaps Sophie's choice isn't all that difficult after all. However, if there were perhaps a little home decor makeover, you know, with a new shower head, adjust the water heater, get one of those non-slip bath mats in the tub, well, maybe a shower or a bath is imaginable for you in the future. Which brings me to this. As Unitarian Universalists, we must understand the pluralism of not only religion, but of religious imagination and language to liberate us from the depressing and narrow forms of God we have been told are the only acceptable ones. Like when we talked about gender or sexuality the past few weeks, we have the power to live beyond the theological binary of please check one, theist, or atheist. Sorry, no fill in the blank, no other option. Indeed, we should be reassured in such an alternative, since the diversity of theological worldviews articulated within and beyond Unitarian Universalism, those in the West and East and in indigenous traditions throughout the world, and each of our own capacities to self-determine what feels right and true to us. When exploring topics of theology, especially conceptions of God, I like to turn to one of my favorite writers, Dr. Sally McFay, who was a professor of theology, most notably for 3 decades at Vanderbilt Divinity School in Nashville, Tennessee. While she has published numerous books, I find her seminal work to be what we drew from for our first reading this morning. In Metaphorical Theology, Models of God in Religious Language, she explains the power and necessity of metaphor, not just in talking about God, but in human language in general. She writes, poets use metaphor all the time because they are constantly speaking about the great unknowns, morality, love, fear, joy, guilt, hope, and so on. Religious language is deeply metaphorical for the same reason. End quote. Metaphor then perhaps liberates us from the limitations of human language and human wisdom. Thus, she develops alternative models of God, which in her day were quite radical, or early, yet today we have come to see them as quite common places across religious beliefs. For example, McFaig's early writings were published during a time of the women's rights movement and an increased awareness of our care for the earth. Thus, when she develops theological models for God, namely God as mother and the world as the body of God, she is able to offer what is called an eco-feminist theology that to this day remains a foundational school of thought for many. Language fails us and metaphor saves us. Well, that is, if we are willing to utilize it. We all think about the world differently, right? Some like poetry, some do not. Some like nonfiction, some love to get lost in the magic of fiction. Perhaps McFaig is correct when she remarks in her book titled Models of God, Theology for an Ecological Nuclear Age, that, quote, theology is mostly fiction. What does this mean? Does this mean, as the staunch atheist would tell you, that everything related to and including God is merely make-believe? It's all made up, just a story? I would beg to differ. I have come to believe that neither life nor literature can be simply divided between fiction and nonfiction, between mystery and reality, between science and spirit. Rather, the power of metaphor reminds us to acknowledge the both and essences of our lives. Metaphor is neither fully true nor fully false. When I refer to the arm of the chair, it is both fiction and nonfiction, real and unreal. That chair doesn't have any arms, yet using the metaphor of arms helps us to orient, interact, and live within our undeniably non-binary universe and a place where we need to sit down. Metaphor can liberate us if we are willing to receive its gifts. When it comes to God or countless other things in life, all cultures, religions, and peoples throughout time are just trying to describe the seemingly indescribable, trying to name the unnameable. In McFaig's words, quote, metaphor is seeing one thing as something else, pretending this is that because we do not know how to think or talk about this. So we use that as a way of saying something about it, end quote. Doing this substitution does not make this or that less real or valid. It helps the individual and community expand their language and understanding regarding the most sacred and the most mundane elements of life. Back to the bathtub. Even if many of us have drained the waters of a certain conception of God, it doesn't mean the The metaphor has run its course, and we are left dripping and cold with no towel. Rather, we have the power to use metaphor in new and renewed ways. We need not look farther than our interfaith partners and other religious traditions to see the countless ways God, goddess, spirit, and divinity may be described. Take Hinduism, for example, which some estimate have over 33 million manifestations of God. While some may see these as each unique and individual gods, others may view them all as different manifestations of the same singular God. Do you know how much metaphor, imagery, and adjectives are needed to visualize 33 million gods? A lot. And yet, the gods that surround us are as numerous as the stars and of our ability to articulate and name them. The Islamic faith has 99 names for Allah, which similarly offers different attributes and metaphors to help explain the seemingly inexplicable. Transcendentalists, from which we draw our imagination, were skilled users of metaphor to point to that by pointing to this instead. Earth-centered, indigenous, and other traditions have engaged the elements of the earth and nature to explain the spirit that surrounds us. Regardless of your individual worldview, regardless of your belief or disbelief in God, the power of metaphor will help us to better understand this infinitely complex world in which we live. Metaphor can help us build bridges across differences in language, culture, and religion. God may feel like the ultimate example of tension among peoples and places throughout the world, yet God may also be the space where metaphor has its most footing for scaling the walls to find connection in this isolating world. Friends, you are more creative and powerful than you may think. You can dream of new ways to not only see God, goddess, spirit, energy, and divinity, but also metaphors to see your neighbor in more humanizing and compassionate ways. Metaphor is surely more of an art than a science, yet so is life. Like a dance. It is a dance that may bring us closer than when we are apart. A dance alone and a dance together, a dance for all that is our lives and all that may yet be possible in this beautiful, precious world in which we live. May it be so, and amen.